Camp Concordia, Kansas, September 1944. The train cars rattled across the Kansas prairie, carrying 200 German prisoners of war toward an uncertain future. They had been captured in France after D-Day, processed through England, and now shipped across the Atlantic to the American heartland, as far from the European war as humanly possible. Among them was Unteroffizier Hans Weber, a 26-year-old Wehrmacht sergeant from Munich, who'd spent 2 years fighting on the Eastern Front before being transferred west, just in time to be captured at St. Lo. He sat squeezed between other prisoners in the boxcar, watching the endless American farmland roll past through the gaps in the wooden slats. "Look at this country," said Corporal Dieter Schmidt beside him. "Untouched. No bombs, no ruins. While our cities burn, they sit here fat and comfortable." "Soft," added another prisoner, Private Kurt Braun. "Americans are soft, rich and soft. They know nothing of real war, real hardship, real sacrifice like we Germans have made." Hans said nothing, but he wondered. He'd fought the Americans in Normandy. They hadn't seemed soft when they were landing on those beaches under withering fire. They hadn't seemed soft when they kept coming, wave after wave, until the German lines broke. The train slowed, then stopped. American MP guards opened the boxcar doors, flooding the interior with afternoon sunlight. "Raus! Raus! Everyone out!" the guards shouted in German. "Line up! Single file!" The prisoners climbed down stiffly, blinking in the bright Kansas sun. After days in the dark boxcar, the openness of the prairie was overwhelming. The sky stretched forever. Fields of wheat waved in the breeze. In the distance, Hans could see the camp, rows of wooden barracks surrounded by wire fence and guard towers. But the fence was different from what he'd expected. It wasn't the electrified razor wire of German prison camps. It was simple chain link, maybe 10 feet high. The guard towers had armed soldiers, yes, but they looked almost bored. This didn't look like a prison. It looked like a military base. "Welcome to Camp Concordia," announced the American captain in charge, speaking through a German-speaking interpreter. "You are now prisoners of war of the United States of America. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will be housed, fed, and given medical care. You will work, but you will be paid for your labor. You will receive mail and packages from home. You will not be abused or mistreated. If you cooperate, you will be safe here until the war ends and you can return to Germany." The prisoners exchanged skeptical looks. This was propaganda, surely. No army treated prisoners this well. It was a trick, a way to make them soft, make them give up information, make them betray the fatherland. The guards processed them efficiently. Names recorded, personal effects cataloged, medical examinations. Each prisoner was given a clean uniform, blue denim work clothes with PW stenciled on the back in white paint. They were issued blankets, towels, soap, toothbrushes, basic necessities, but more than Hans had expected. Then they were marched to the mess hall for dinner. The building was large, clean, and brightly lit. Long tables with benches, a serving line where American cooks stood behind steam tables. The smell hit Hans first. Roasted meat, bread, coffee, real food, not the watery soup and black bread that had been Wehrmacht rations for the past year. "Propaganda," muttered Dieter beside him. "They feed us well the first day, take photographs, show the world how humane they are. Tomorrow we will get the real prison food." The prisoners lined up with metal trays. The American cooks, most of them black soldiers, Hans noticed, served generous portions without comment or malice. Hans looked down at his tray in disbelief. A thick slice of roast beef, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, 2 slices of white bread with butter, an apple, and a cup of real coffee with sugar. This was more food than Hans had seen on one plate in 2 years of Wehrmacht service. More meat than a German civilian had seen since rationing started. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be the standard prison meal. The prisoners sat at the long tables, staring at their trays with suspicion and hunger warring on their faces. "It's a trick," said Kurt, poking at the roast beef with his fork. "Probably drugged, or poisoned, or it's American garbage they're giving us to humiliate us. They're scraps and leftovers. The meat looks strange," observed another prisoner. "Probably horse meat, or worse. Americans don't know how to cook proper food. This will be terrible. Tasteless. We should eat it because we're hungry, but we shouldn't pretend it's real food." Several prisoners laughed, a bitter sound. They began to mock the food on their trays. making jokes about American cooking, American culture, American softness. It was a defense mechanism, Hans recognized, a way to maintain some dignity in captivity. If they could look down on American food, American ways, they could tell themselves they were still superior, despite being captured. Hans watched an American guard standing nearby, a young sergeant, maybe 22 years old. The American understood no German, but he could read body language. He could see the prisoners laughing and sneering at the food. His face remained neutral, but Hans saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, almost pity, amusement. The American turned and said something to another guard. They both smiled slightly and walked away. Hans picked up his fork. Whatever games the others wanted to play, he was too hungry to care about pride. He cut a piece of the roast beef and put it in his mouth. He froze. The meat was perfect, tender, juicy, seasoned with salt and herbs, rich, real. This wasn't horse meat. This wasn't garbage. This was better beef than he'd eaten even before the war, when his father would take the family to nice restaurants in Munich for special occasions. Hans chewed slowly, his eyes closing involuntarily. Around him, other prisoners were taking their first bites. The mockery died away. The mess hall fell silent except for the sounds of eating. The mashed potatoes were creamy, rich with butter. The gravy was thick and savory. The green beans were fresh, not canned, not pickled, but actually fresh. The bread was soft, sweet, made with real white flour, not the sawdust extended bread they'd been eating in Germany. Hans looked around the table. Every prisoner wore the same expression of shock, of confusion, of reluctant recognition that something they'd believed was fundamentally wrong. Dieter spoke first, his voice quiet. "This is what they eat, Americans. This is what they give prisoners," added Kurt, disbelief heavy in his voice. Hans took a bite of the apple, crisp, sweet, perfect. He thought about his family back in Munich, his mother, his sister. They'd been on starvation rations for over a year. Bread made from chestnuts and potatoes, watery soup with turnips, meat once a month if they were lucky. His letters from home described constant hunger, children with swollen bellies, old people dying from malnutrition. And here he sat, a prisoner, eating better than German civilians, better than German soldiers, better than he'd eaten in years. "They're not even using this food for their own soldiers," Hans said slowly, realization dawning. "This is just prisoner food, standard rations. They have so much food that they can feed prisoners like this." The implication settled over the table like a heavy blanket. Germany had been told that America was weak, struggling, barely able to feed itself, that the Allied blockade was meaningless because the Allies were just as desperate as Germany. That victory was inevitable because Germany's will was stronger. But a nation that could feed prisoners this well, that could ship this much food across an ocean while fighting a war on 2 continents, that could afford to treat captured enemies with this level of comfort, that nation was not weak. That nation was not struggling. That nation was so powerful it could be generous. Over the following days, the truth of Camp Concordia became impossible to deny. The food wasn't a one-time propaganda trick. Every meal was like that. 3 times a day, the prisoners ate better than they had as soldiers fighting for the Wehrmacht. Breakfast, eggs, bacon, toast, real coffee, orange juice. Hans hadn't seen an orange since 1940. Here, juice came from concentrate, and they could drink as much as they wanted. Lunch, sandwiches with actual meat and cheese, soup, vegetables, fruit, milk. Dinner, varying main courses, roast chicken, pork chops, beef stew, all with sides and bread and dessert. The portions were sufficient. No one went hungry. No one fought over food. There was enough. The barracks were clean and heated. Each prisoner had his own bunk with a real mattress, sheets, and warm blankets. There were showers with hot water and soap, a library with books in German, a recreation area with sports equipment. The camp even had a small theater where prisoners could put on plays. The work details were reasonable. Prisoners worked on nearby farms, helping with harvest. The American farmers paid them in camp scrip that could be used at the camp canteen to buy cigarettes, candy, toiletries, even beer once a week. The work was hard but fair. The guards were firm but not cruel. No one was beaten. No one was starved. No one disappeared in the night. It was, Hans realized with growing disquiet, better than how he'd been treated as a soldier in the Wehrmacht. "This is psychological warfare," insisted Kurt. still clinging to the old certainties. They're making us soft, making us forget who we are, making us love America so we'll betray Germany. But the words rang hollow, because the Americans weren't asking them to betray Germany, weren't asking them for information, weren't asking them to denounce Hitler. They were just treating them like human beings, following the Geneva Convention, giving captured soldiers the basic dignities that the convention required, which Germany had stopped doing years ago. Hans thought about the Russian prisoners he'd seen on the Eastern Front, starving, dying of cold and disease, treated as subhuman because Nazi ideology said they were subhuman. He'd told himself it was necessary, that it was total war, that the Russians were doing the same to German prisoners. But were they? And even if they were, did that make it right? The American guards were professional. They didn't gloat, didn't mock, didn't try to convert the prisoners to American ways. They just did their jobs, maintaining order, ensuring the Geneva Convention was followed, treating prisoners firmly but fairly. One guard in particular caught Hans's attention. Sergeant James Washington was a black soldier from Georgia, probably 30 years old, with the bearing of a career military man. Hans had been taught that black people were inferior, that America's treatment of them proved American hypocrisy and weakness. But Sergeant Washington was the most professional soldier Hans had encountered in 5 years of military service. He was strict but fair. He knew every regulation. He treated German prisoners with distant respect, not friendship, but basic human dignity. And the other American guards, white and black together, clearly respected him. One afternoon, Hans was on a work detail with Sergeant Washington supervising. They were loading grain at a nearby farm. It was hard work, but no harder than what Hans had done as a soldier. During a break, Hans worked up the courage to speak. "Sergeant Washington," Hans said in his limited English. "Question, please." Washington looked at him, expression neutral. "Yeah? Why you treat us good? We are enemy. We would not treat American prisoners like this." Washington was silent for a long moment. Then, "That's exactly why we treat you like this. Because we're better than that. Because how you treat prisoners says more about you than it does about them. And because we're Americans. We believe people got rights, even prisoners, even enemies. But the food is so much food for prisoners. Why? Because we can afford it. Because we got more than enough. And because a prisoner who's fed, who's treated decent, who knows he's going to be safe and go home when the war ends, that prisoner don't try to escape, don't cause trouble, makes our job easier. Makes sense to treat people right." Hans struggled with the English but thought he understood. The Americans weren't being generous because they were soft. They were being strategic. They were so powerful they could afford to be humane, and that humanity served their purposes. It was a kind of strength Hans had never considered. He'd been taught that strength was brutality, that mercy was weakness, that treating enemies well made you vulnerable. But here was proof of a different kind of strength. The strength of a nation so powerful it didn't need to be cruel, so rich it could afford to be generous, so confident in its principles that it followed them even for enemies. That night, Hans lay in his bunk and thought about home, about Munich, probably bombed again by now, about his mother and sister, hungry, cold, afraid, about German prisoners in Russian camps dying by thousands, about the war that Germany was clearly losing, had maybe always been losing against enemies with this much power, this much wealth. And he thought about the meal he'd eaten for dinner: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, corn, biscuits, apple pie. A feast by German standards. Standard prison fare by American standards. The other prisoners were having the same realization, each in their own time. The mockery had stopped. The sneering was gone. Instead, there was quiet confusion. A slow recognition that everything they'd been told might be a lie. "We were so stupid," Dieter said one evening as they sat outside their barracks, watching the sunset over the Kansas prairie. "We thought we were the master race. We thought we were superior. We thought Germany was destined to rule Europe, maybe the world. And all the time America was over here," added another prisoner. "With so much food they can feed prisoners like kings. With so much industry they can build ships faster than we can sink them. With so much power they're fighting Japan in the Pacific and Germany in Europe at the same time. We never had a chance," Hans said quietly. "Did we?" No one answered, because the answer was obvious now. Here in the prisoner camp in Kansas, where even captured enemies ate better than German civilians, No, Germany had never had a chance. Not against this. Not against a nation that could fight a two-front war and still have enough left over to treat prisoners with comfort. One day, a Red Cross representative visited the camp to inspect conditions. He was Swiss, neutral, professional. He interviewed prisoners about their treatment. Hans was among those selected. "Are you being fed adequately?" the inspector asked in German. Hans almost laughed. "Better than adequate, sir. Better than I've eaten in 5 years. Better than German civilians are eating." The inspector nodded, unsurprised. "And your accommodations? The barracks? Clean, warm, comfortable. Better than Wehrmacht barracks. Better than most German homes now. Medical care? Available, free, good quality. Better than many Germans can access. Treatment by the guards?" Hans hesitated. "Fair, firm, but fair. No abuse, no cruelty. They follow the Geneva Convention exactly." The inspector made notes. "And the work? Reasonable. We're paid. It's honest labor. We're treated like workers, not slaves." After the inspection, the Swiss representative addressed the assembled prisoners. "I have inspected 47 prisoner camps in the United States," he said. "All of them meet or exceed Geneva Convention requirements. Many exceed them significantly. You are being treated better than prisoners of war have been treated in any conflict in human history. The Americans are following the rules even though your country stopped following them years ago." "Why?" someone called out. "Why do they do this?" The Swiss representative smiled slightly. "Because they can afford to, and because they believe it's right. That combination, power and principle, is very difficult to defeat." The months passed. Fall turned to winter. Christmas came, and the Americans organized a celebration. They brought in a decorated tree, served a special meal, roasted turkey, ham, stuffing, cranberry sauce, pies, everything. They allowed the prisoners to hold a religious service. They distributed packages from the Red Cross. Hans sat in the mess hall on Christmas Eve 1944, eating a meal that his family in Munich could only dream of, and felt a profound sense of dislocation. He was a prisoner, defeated and captive, but he was warm, fed, safe. His family in Germany were free citizens of the Reich, but they were cold, hungry, terrified of bombs. Who was really the prisoner? Who was really free? "I don't want to go back," Kurt said suddenly. He'd been the loudest voice mocking America, but something had broken in him. "When the war ends, I don't want to go back to Germany. There's nothing there. Just ruins, just hunger, just defeat. We have to go back," Dieter said. "It's our country, our home." "Is it?" Kurt gestured around the warm mess hall, at the Christmas tree, at the plates of food. "Is this not better than any home we'll find in Germany? The Americans built this camp in a few months. In Germany, we couldn't build something this good in years even before the war. We're defeated. We were always going to be defeated. We never understood what we were fighting against." Hans understood. They'd been taught that will was everything, that German spirit and determination would overcome any material disadvantage. But will didn't fill empty stomachs. Spirit didn't rebuild bombed cities. Determination didn't defeat an enemy that could feed prisoners like honored guests. In January 1945, news reached the camp that the Russians had launched a massive offensive. Germany was collapsing. The prisoners gathered around the radio in the recreation room, listening to reports. Cities falling. German armies retreating. The end was visible now. "What will happen to us?" younger prisoners asked, fear in their voices. "When Germany surrenders, will they send us to Russia? Will they execute us for war crimes?" Sergeant Washington, who'd overheard, shook his head. "You're protected by Geneva Convention. When the war ends, you'll be processed and sent home. We're not executioners. We're American soldiers. We follow the rules." And Hans believed him, because for 7 months, the Americans had followed the rules. Every day, every meal, every interaction. They'd treated enemy prisoners better than Germany treated its own people. That was American power. Not just the guns and tanks and ships, not just the industry and agriculture, but the confidence to follow their own principles even when they didn't have to, the strength to be humane to enemies, the discipline to maintain standards even in war. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. The prisoners learned of Hitler's suicide, Germany's surrender, the full extent of the defeat. Some prisoners wept, some were relieved, most just felt empty. "What do we tell people when we go home?" Dieter asked. "How do we explain that we were treated better as prisoners in America than as soldiers in Germany? That the enemy fed us and cared for us better than our own government did? We tell the truth. Hans said. "We tell them what we saw, what we learned. That strength isn't just about brutality, that a nation powerful enough can afford to be generous. That America won not just because of their tanks and planes, but because they could feed prisoners like this while fighting a war on 2 continents. The repatriation process took months. The Americans were in no hurry, and frankly, neither were many prisoners. Hans was finally sent home in November 1945, over 6 months after the war ended. He'd gained weight in captivity, actually gained weight while supposedly imprisoned. He was healthier leaving the camp than he'd been arriving. The journey back to Germany was long. The ship docked in Bremerhaven, and Hans saw his homeland for the first time in over a year. What he saw shocked him, even though he'd been prepared. Ruins. Nothing but ruins. Cities bombed to rubble, people thin and desperate, children begging for food, old women picking through garbage, the infrastructure destroyed, no electricity, no water, no transportation functioning. This was the master race. This was the 1,000-year Reich. This was what German superiority had achieved. Hans made his way to Munich, hitchhiking and walking. The city of his birth was 60% destroyed. His family's apartment building was partially collapsed, but his mother and sister had survived, living in 2 rooms of what had been a 5-room apartment. They wept when they saw him, not just from joy at his survival, but from relief that he looked healthy, well-fed, strong. "You were a prisoner?" his mother said, confused. "But you look better than when you left." Hans told them everything. About Camp Concordia, about the food, the conditions, the treatment, about learning that America had so much they could afford to be generous to enemies, about realizing that Germany had fought an enemy they never understood and could never defeat. His sister, 19 now and thin from years of hunger, listened with tears running down her face. "They fed you like that? Every day? While we were starving? While German children were dying?" "Yes," Hans said quietly. "And not just prisoners. Their whole population ate like that. Their soldiers, their civilians, everyone. They have so much, Lisa. So much that they don't even know what shortage means. We were told they were weak and decadent, but they're so strong they can afford to be kind." His mother was silent for a long time. Then, "We were lied to. About everything. About America. About the war. About German superiority. We were lied to, and we believed it. And now," she gestured at the ruined city around them. "Now this is what we have. This is what the lies cost us." Hans spent the next years helping rebuild Germany. He worked hard, used the skills he'd learned in the camp, tried to make something from the ruins, and he told his story to anyone who would listen. About Camp Concordia, about American power, about learning that strength and kindness could coexist. Many people didn't want to hear it. They'd lost too much, suffered too much. Accepting that the enemy had been right, had been better, had been more humane, that was too painful. Easier to nurse resentment, to imagine they'd been defeated by numbers alone, not by a better system, a better society, a better way. But some listened, younger people especially. People ready to rebuild Germany differently, people willing to learn from defeat. And slowly, over years, the lesson spread. There was another way, a way where you didn't need to brutalize your enemies to prove your strength, where you could be powerful and principled at the same time. In 1960, Hans received an unexpected letter. It was from Sergeant James Washington, the American Guard from Camp Concordia. Washington had tracked him down through veterans organizations. The letter was simple. "Dear Hans, I remember you from the camp. You asked me once why we treated you well. I've thought about that question for 15 years. Here's a better answer than I gave you then. We treated you well because that's who we wanted to be. Not perfect. God knows America has its own sins to answer for. But we wanted to be a country that followed its own rules, that lived up to its own ideals, that proved power and principle could exist together. I hope you've built a good life in Germany. I hope you've told people what you saw, because the world needs to know that there's a different way, that strength doesn't require cruelty, that winning doesn't mean abandoning your humanity. You were never just a prisoner to us. You were a test of whether we meant what we said about human dignity and rights. I think we passed that test. I hope the memory of that helps as Germany rebuilds." Respectfully, James Washington Hans kept that letter until he died in 1998. He showed it to his children, his grandchildren. He told them about Camp Concordia, about the food he'd mocked until he tasted it, about learning that everything he'd been taught was wrong. The hardest lesson of my life, he would tell them, was learning that my enemies were better people than I'd been led to believe, that they were stronger because they could afford to be kind. That power without principle is just brutality, but power with principle, that's something that can change the world. At his funeral, his daughter read from his memoirs, which he'd written in old age. I went to America as a prisoner expecting to be treated like an animal. Instead, I was treated like a human being. I mocked their food, thinking it would be garbage. Instead, it was better than anything I'd eaten as a free man in Germany. That day in the mess hall, when I took the first bite and realized the Americans fed prisoners better than Germany fed soldiers, something broke in me. All the propaganda, all the lies about German superiority, all the certainty that we were the master race destined to rule, it all crumbled with that one bite of roast beef. I learned that day that strength isn't about how cruelly you can treat your enemies. It's about how well you can treat them and still win. The Americans didn't need to torture us to defeat us. They didn't need to starve us to break us. They just needed to show us the truth, that they were so powerful, so wealthy, so organized, that they could afford to be generous. That generosity, that strength through kindness, was more devastating than any cruelty could have been, because it forced us to see the truth, and the truth was that we never had a chance, not against that kind of power, not against a nation that could fight a war on 2 continents and still feed prisoners like honored guests. I returned to Germany humbled and educated. I spent the rest of my life trying to teach what I learned, that there is a better way, that power and principle can coexist, that a strong nation doesn't need to be cruel. I pray that Germany has learned this lesson. I pray the world has learned it, because the alternative, the path we chose, leads only to ruins and graves. I am grateful to have been a prisoner in America. It taught me how to be free. The story of Hans Weber and thousands like him became part of the hidden history of World War II. The story of prisoners who arrived expecting brutality and found humanity, who mocked American food until they tasted it and realized they'd been lied to about everything. It's a story about power, about what it means to be truly strong, about how a nation secure in its strength can afford to be generous, about how following your principles, even for enemies, is the ultimate demonstration of confidence and power. The prisoners who passed through American camps, over 400,000 of them during the war, returned to Germany with this knowledge. Many became leaders in rebuilding their country. Many spread the lesson that there was another way, that you could be powerful without being brutal, that kindness was strength, not weakness. They'd learned it from roast beef and mashed potatoes, from clean barracks and fair treatment, from guards who followed the rules even for enemies, from a nation that proved its greatness not by destroying its captives, but by treating them with dignity. That's the power of principle backed by strength. That's the lesson of Camp Concordia and hundreds of camps like it. That's why those prisoners who mocked American food until they took the first bite never forgot what they learned. Because sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't a bomb or a bullet. Sometimes it's just showing someone the truth.